Hey guys, what's up? In this video, I'm going to talk about a design I've made for a hardware inline MIDI arpeggiator. MIDI arpeggiators are not entirely rare. The EDM world is pretty familiar with them. They're often built into either a keyboard or a synth module or a DAW if you're going to use that. I'm sort of more interested in pure hardware setups for performance where there's not a computer in the loop. So I was thinking if I wanted arpeggiation and I had a keyboard that didn't have it and a synth module that didn't have it, could I add it as a standalone little module? And I couldn't find that for sale in the market. I think I know why now, because it turns out to be not entirely trivial to do arpeggiation using just MIDI data. I'll talk about why that is in a little bit. But first of all, let me start out by sort of saying what arpeggiation is. And it's the idea of playing the notes of a scale one after the other. And an arpeggiator is a piece of hardware that will automate that process for you. You just hold down the notes you want to play in your sequence, and it sequences them for you. Normally, if you were to just press three keys on a MIDI keyboard, you just get a chord. The arpeggiator instead sequences those three notes sort of like this. So I'm going to use, to demo this first, I'll use an Arteria keystep keyboard that has a sequencer built in. I'm sorry, and an arpeggiator, it also has a sequencer, but it has an arpeggiator built in. And so if I just press three notes without the arpeggiator, I'll get a chord. Not the prettiest sounding chord. Let's go up an octave. For sound, I'm using this a Yamaha TX81Z FM synthesizer, playing it through a little Bluetooth speaker. But let's turn on the arpeggiation now, and we'll listen to what happens. I can add notes while I'm playing or let notes out. And that's the idea. So, but that's built into the keyboard, and it's actually easy to build that kind of a thing into the keyboard because the keyboard has access to the keys that are pressed just as switches. That is, they're just on or off depending on whether you pressed it or not, and typically there's velocity and aftertouch also, but that's not important for our purposes here. The important thing is that anytime a piece of electronics that wanted to tell whether a key is pressed needs to know that information, it can just read the voltage off that switch, and it's going to be the same whether the key is pressed regardless of when you read it. MIDI, on the other hand, which is the protocol for transmitting note data digitally between keyboards and synthesizers and so forth, just sends a serial message when a note turns on and then one when it turns off. And it's up to all the other devices in the MIDI system to detect those on and off messages and respond to them appropriately. And the problem is when a lot of stuff's happening and it's happening fast, say I don't know, 240 beats per minute or something, it's hard for a processor to keep up with all that. There may be a lot of velocity and aftertouch or control change messages coming in as well. And it turns out that the cheap 8-bit Arduino processor I started with wasn't quite fast enough. I had to go to a faster processor, a SparkFun Redboard Turbo, which uses an ARM Cortex processor running at 48 megahertz, which is a little bit more powerful than the standard 8-bit Atmel processor in the Arduino Uno boards. So, but I think the faster processor really paid off, and we don't seem to lose any MIDI messages with the faster processor. I tried everything in software I could on the slower processor, essentially using interrupt handlers to handle the note on and note off messages, and just putting those messages into a queue to process when things slow down. And I wasn't losing anything out of the queue, but somehow overall it just wasn't fast enough. So anyway, we've got that going for us, and before I demo it, let me show you it up close to the camera. And here's my first prototype. So like I said, what I've got here is an Arduino processor on the bottom. This one's just the basic Arduino Uno, which like I said isn't quite fast enough. And then the SparkFun MIDI shield, which has a MIDI in jack, a MIDI out jack, 3 push buttons, and 2 potentiometers. And I'm going to use those controls to set various parameters of my arpeggiator. I'll use one of the potentiometers to control the rate, another one to control the velocity or loudness of the notes that are pressed, and the 3 push buttons. One will turn it on and off. So when it's in the off mode, you want to just, it's not turned off, but it just passes the MIDI messages that arrive on its input straight through to its output. So it's not affecting the sound in any way, because you want to be able to use it or not use it as is appropriate for your music. The middle button is a latch button, which allows it to keep arpeggiating when you let the keys up. And that'd be useful if you need to use your hand to play another keyboard or twiddle knobs or any of the other things that EDM musicians are fond of. And then the third button I use to control mode. And I've got 4 modes implemented. One is ascending arpeggio. The second is descending arpeggio. The third is alternating ascending and descending, only playing the top and bottom notes once. And then the fourth is alternating ascending, then descending, but playing the top notes and bottom notes twice. So those are the features. And with this little setup I've got, let me demo it. So the arpeggiator is here, and the signal routing, the white cable, comes from the Arturia into the MIDI in of the arpeggiator. Black cable is MIDI out and goes to the TX81Z synthesizer, and then audio on the green cable from the synthesizer to the little speaker. And arpeggiation's turned off right now. So I will hit the on button to activate it. And that's in the ascending mode. I can add notes or remove them from the arpeggio as I'm playing. I've got a maximum of 8 notes on. I'm playing 7 right there. I have to let some up, and I'm going to hit the latch mode. Now I can take all my keys up and it keeps playing. I can adjust the rate. Looks like we had it as fast as it could go, so I'm slowing it down. With the other knob, I can adjust velocity. And let's change the mode. So this is ascending, we'll go to descending. Now alternating. Just playing the top notes once and bottom notes once. And both modes are, top notes and bottom notes twice. And we'll now kill the arpeggio. And it always kills at the top or the bottom of an arpeggio rather than just whenever you happen to hit it, so that you can sort of finish things off cleanly. There are a number of things I would like to do with this in the future. I think it would just be a programming change to, instead of having the velocity set by a knob, have the velocity set by how hard you actually push down the key when you initiate it in the arpeggio, so that each note will be at its own separate velocity. I think without any additional hardware, it would be easy to output not MIDI data, but CV data for Eurorack and analog modular synths. So that's something one could do in the future. If I do implement the velocity, then I've got a free knob, and what could I use that for? One thought would be swing, where the two halves of a beat aren't the same length. You could adjust it sort of from a 40-60 ratio to a 60-40 ratio for the kinds of music that's appropriate for. And I think all those things would be nice changes. Yeah, so that's the arpeggiator, and be sure to hit like and subscribe.